So, I have to give a little bit of context to kind of a thing, you know. It's funny with all the coronavirus and everything, we've been watching everybody, panic. And, I mean, there are all the jokes and so on about people panic buying toilet paper to handle something that has symptoms like a flu or a cold or something like that. And then you see stories where you're watching people like fight each other over things at the grocery store, trampling each other to get things that maybe are not so important. People hoarding hand sanitizer and different things like that, and then trying to peddle them to people online. I saw a thing of like where somebody was selling a big roll of toilet paper for like $60
What?
online.
Oh, come on, we are not there yet.
We're there.
Oh.
It's funny because, like, to be really, really, really open for a minute, what struck me, because I was just kind of like feeling stuff yesterday and seeing in the spirit in ways that I didn't anticipate. In the midst of everything that's been going on with Heather and her health and like trying to take care of her, I see myself in a lot of those people, more than I care to admit.
Oh, you're recording?
Yeah, it's all good.
He's gonna edit it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he edits the way he wants to.
Did you do that from the end?
No, I wish. No,
Yeah.
I'm just taking notes on the picture of a cat farting. Because I'm deep.
So, like I was saying, I've been kind of like watching everything with that and kind of seeing myself. God has convicted me a few different times in the past few months about my behavior towards people, like as I'm trying to go get like meds or supplies to try to like protect Heather, and then like I'm so focused on it that I'm not thinking about how I'm acting. So I'm like tailgating people on the road and like bullying people out of my way and different things like that. And even like meeting people in the store and so on, when rather than being like salt and light, instead I'm just kind of like being very brusque and even just completely dismissive. So I'll have like some person be really nice and try to talk to me, and I'm just like, get out of my way. I have to get back to take care of my wife. And the thing of it is that, now with all this stuff happening and watching people do this, and like, God's talked to me about this stuff a few different times, and, at first I was kind of aghast at, how people were being. And then after thinking about it and feeling it for a minute, it was like, nah, I understand that. And the reason why I say all that is because it's really easy to forget how close we can be to those kinds of states. It's really easy to judge. And one of the things about, as we talk about compassion and the nature of compassion, and this is kind of one of the more human elements of compassion as it is being able to recognize yourself in others. We're called to be a light to the world, but sometimes I think we get so focused on being that light and following those standards that we forget about how to be another person. And we forget how much the human condition affects us all. And how even with that, as we try to like maintain this over here, we forget sometimes exactly how much we're still on that other end of things. Even to the point where, I've seen followers of Jesus be extremely ambitious about how they're going to be that salt and light, and how they're going to show everybody God, to the point where they can even start going against God in order to do that. But the biggest thing that God was kind of like presenting to me was kind of the reality of this. And like, you know, Jesus was interesting in that he came and he met people where they were at. And he went through so many of the things that we went through. You know, when we talk about suffering and temptation, and we think about the desert. But that was not the only time that Jesus was tempted. You know, when he went out into the desert and Satan took him to all those places and offered him so many different things, you know, he was bound to have been tempted many, many times over throughout his life. What's more is, in Hebrews it talks about how he was made lower than the angels so he could be like us. And Christ, he lived this out and he experienced this, but he still maintained himself. He still chose to kind of do more, even to the point where you see him getting tired, and then at the end he was willing to go as a sacrifice to suffer everything that he suffered at the cross for us. And he didn't forget, you know, what it was to be a man on the cross. He didn't lose sight of that, even in the midst of it, where he's sitting up there with the other guys as they're crying out in their own ways. He's having mercy on the other guy up there with him. Sometimes, like, it's in the midst of all this stuff where we get really caught up in our heads that we start losing sight of what it is to be compassionate and to care. But more than that, we also lose sight of the cost of compassion. See, one of the biggest things here is that we need to recognize that, even especially in the midst of things like this, where so many people are panicking, and where we're panicking to some extent, there's a place to recognize that it's not always about getting ahead. It's not always about achieving. It's not always about getting what you might even need sometimes. I think one of the hardest things for us in general, and one of the hardest things period, is recognizing the ability to trust God for what you are going to get and what he's going to provide for you. Because we're not really used to that, especially when we kind of like switch into survival mode and we need to try to take care of everything for ourselves. And then we can, ironically, even when we get that, we can also be really judgmental of people who don't, because we forget, you know, what it's like. None of us just innately knew God. You know, we might have had an awareness or something like that, but when it comes down to it, all of us were saved at some point. We all turned to him, asked him to forgive us for our sins, and then were forgiven and freed, and in that we were saved. But each of us had to undergo that process. I like how, I believe it's John, or it's not, I'm wrong. It's Paul who talks about how, you know, everybody has been a sinner, everybody has gone through that process, and how nobody's better than anybody else in that regard. So it's important for us to keep that in mind, to remember that. But more than that, even be willing to surrender these parts of ourselves where, you know, we do want to like try to grab a hold and take control of things, especially when they get scary. But sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is to let go of that control. And that's, fittingly enough, that's not even just for other people's sake. Sometimes that's even for our own. Self-compassion is an important part of life too. So one of the biggest things here is that that cost. See, we oftentimes think of it in terms of what Paul talks about running the race. And I've seen a lot of people where we kind of build that concept into the same kind of thing that we look at like a sporting event or something like that, about how it is about achieving this. But I want to call our attention back to something that Jesus says, I believe it's in Matthew 5. There we go. Matthew 5:38. You've heard that it was said, eye for an eye for eye and tooth for tooth, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor, and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. One of the big things that I want to call attention to is like the heart behind all of this, because it's easy to read this as like okay, guys, take a beating for other people. But the intention behind it calls to this point of God's desire for his people, his love for his people, but more than anything, his recognition for who they are. One of the big things that we struggle with, I think, is that we tend to view people as adversaries. If you're not helping me, if you're hindering my faith, then you're my adversary. If you're coming against me in any way, shape, or form, then you're my adversary, you're my enemy. But one of the things that we've oftentimes talked about in this group is that God doesn't view his children as his enemies. In fact, when Jesus talks about the enemy, he only talks about one enemy, and that being Satan. And it's really easy, especially in times like this where we want to take control of things, for us to lose sight of that and start viewing those who create adversity for us as being our enemies. And sometimes even there's parts of us who, some of us even have parts where we want to win more than anything. And it becomes this thing where, it's not about the stuff, it's not about the success, it's not about those other facets of life, but it is about taking care of those around you, and is about being an example. I know that for me personally, if somebody walks up and punches me in the face, I'm not good at turning the other cheek. I'm going to hit them back. And that's not necessarily a good thing. I'm just saying, that's been an issue for me in the past. It usually takes a lot of restraint for me to, hold off. But when I have, it's been because I can remember that the person doing this maybe doesn't appreciate what they're doing or why, and that maybe I don't need to completely lay waste to another human being because they are valuable to God. At the end of the day, I was able to see the person instead of their action. And that becomes invaluable as we move forward through life and through the various people that come against us in it. And especially when it comes to having compassion on people's recognizing the other one, recognizing the humanity of the person on the other side of you. And how that's something that's meant to be carried by all of us. They're all our brothers and sisters. The other part about this is like, it wasn't focused on the stuff, you know, give them your tunic. Or if they sue you and take your tunic, give them your cloak also. Because it doesn't control you. It's not about the stuff. Why should we hold on to something? Why does it matter? If that matters so much to them, fine, let them have it. That's their God, so to speak. That's not something that's meant to control us. And when we get caught up in this stuff and what we're going to do and be, we can oftentimes become controlled by things in this world. To go a little further in the scriptures, in Matthew 6, Jesus goes on to talk about, it's in 6:25, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more important than food, and the body more important than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Who of you who by worrying can add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the lilies of the field grow? They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, O ye of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." So, like, remembering this stuff, it's important for us to hold on to these kinds of things, this kind of perspective of knowing that God's going to take care of us. And it doesn't always feel that way, of course. Like, we all run into circumstances where we feel like God's not providing for us, like he's not taking care of us, like he's not holding up his end. And then oftentimes when the point comes where that relief, when that relief arrives, we end up having to pray for forgiveness for being like really whiny, shall we say. In my case, I tend to be like really bitter and mean, very angry whenever like I approach God in those times.
When it doesn't seem like he's looking out for you.
Exactly. And then relief comes and I feel, for lack of a better word, I feel like an ass. So,
Haven't we all?
yeah.
I can think of times when I've like worried too much about something and then everything falls into place. I'm just like, why did I worry? Like,
Yeah.
I feel so stupid.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like, you know, with that, we find ourselves sitting in a place where we shouldn't need to worry. We should be able to sit and trust. And much more than that is, that's something that we should be bringing to the world around us. Something that can be that salt and light as we bring people the wisdom and understanding that, yeah, God's going to take care of you. It's going to be okay. Like, he's gonna work for you. He's gonna fight for you. He's gonna do what he can for you. And what he can do is a lot. He created the world and the universe around it. Apparently, he's pretty powerful in ways. So, this is something for us to hold on to. And I bring this up, and it might seem out of place in a way, when talking about, you know, being compassionate on other people. But the reason why this is so important is this trust in God is something that we as followers of Jesus have. And whether we actually believe that or not, whether we actually live by that or not, it's something that's there. God's promises don't disappear because you don't believe in them. You just don't see them. I've seen people who are I can think of one person in particular who's a follower of Jesus. He believes in God. He does not believe God will protect him or take care of him. But he's still provided for every step of the way. And he just doesn't see it. It's like a blind spot. God has not abandoned him. God has never left him without. But he's so quick to attach himself to the idea that God's not going to take care of him, that he completely misses the many blessings that are provided for him over and over and over again. And this is something that's real for us. So the first thing that I've felt led to kind of bring us to here is this point of trusting God, that he's going to take care of us. And we all have those experiences like you're talking about, Shane. I have so many. And yet, when something gets hard, I still run into that same thing of oh, God's abandoned me. Why aren't you doing this, God? Ugh. But it's important for us to hold on to these memories of these things. And also, when we see people around us who are struggling to do that exact same thing, remember where you have done the same. Because I assure you, empathy will go a lot farther in helping people kind of come back to the earth than judgment. Saying, hey, I understand what you're going through because I've been there, has a lot more weight than, what are you doing? Don't you know that God's going to provide for you? Dummy.
It's a nice way to say it.
It's just this thing, it's important for us to have that, to be there, and to even stay there. And it's important for us as individuals, as followers of Jesus, because it lets so much of the attack of the enemy and the kind of chaos of this world kind of fall off our back. But also it's important for other people because, as we live and breathe, we are examples of our Father. And that's the state that we live in. Whether we whether we realize it or not, this is where we exist. And people are constantly going to be looking at us and trying to determine whether or not we are, in fact, good examples of God.
You could say it was true.
And it's not always fair, but it is the way that the world is, because the world's always looking for reasons to kind of disqualify God, and especially his children. A lot of people want to kind of maintain their confirmation bias that, all Christians are hypocrites. Or that, there are reasons for why they don't need to look to God because he's not going to provide for his own people. Why would he provide for them? There's so many different things, and there's a lot of fear there. Because even the thing that holds us back, when we read passages like this, and, for some people, for many people, we also have, God in our ears talking to us and speaking to us and bringing us back to these kinds of words and these promises. And yet we still do that same thing, where we get scared when we're called to trust him. I think that last song, Tender, was the most apt thing for us to end on and start on when we're talking about trusting in God, because there's so much about the intimacy that we need to have with him that tears away everything. All of that fear is so easily removed when we're close. And when we're not worrying about what we're going to look like or how people are going to perceive us. And what's more is that lends itself so much to being compassionate to the others around us, because you stop caring about what they're doing so much as the desire to help them out of what they're doing and where they're at. It's the kind of thing where it's the point where you can actually like take and stand on that ground, that solid rock that is God. And you can give up your last roll of toilet paper that you're buying at the store for that person that's panicking that they're not going to get any, and be fine. And that's the thing, is like, it's really important for us to be able to like stand on this trust in God and this knowledge that he's got our back, this understanding that he's always working for us. Because as we stand there, the world moves around us in all of its waves and chaos and all the different things. And what's more than that is we're able to grab some of those people that are being swept by and help them hold on as well. Because see, the thing about compassion is, I bring up the cost of it. The cost of compassion is that you don't always win when you're doing the compassionate thing. See, moral victories don't always feel like victories. What's more is they don't always push you forward into success. Sometimes making the right choice is letting the other person go first and take your turn. Get ahead of you. Win the day for themselves. Just like for any of them, it might be doing the same for you at some point. But the point is that, you know, for us as people, as followers of Jesus, and where it is for us to be an example of Christ's love, I want you to think for a moment about what Christ's love looks like. Christ's love is the kind that endures immense punishment, endures a lifetime of being spit on by people he loved. Whether it was when he showed up to his hometown and got mocked by the people there, but he still persisted in being who he was, who he is. Whether it was when he went to the synagogues and preached, and the Jews were on him, the religious leaders were on him all the time, questioning him, trying to trap him, trying to prove that he was nothing that he said he was. And he still persisted. And then at the end of it, he suffered terribly. A terrible, terrible punishment and a slow death in pain and anguish alone. All for us. That's what Christ's love looks like. That's what we're called into. That's what we're built on. That's what feeds us and lets us continue on as we make all of our mistakes and do all of our little things, panicking over this thing or that. And that's the thing that we're looking to exemplify. It's a really big thing to carry. And it's not really ours to carry, it's just something for us to do and to exist in. And it's very freeing to exist in that state, as opposed to being, tossed about by the ways of the world. And, talking about the trust of God is one thing. The other thing is talking about who you are. Who you are is a child of God. And you have a very, very important role in this world, in this life, in that regard. We could pull up, like the verse that I've got is Ephesians 4. And it kind of expresses this in some well-worded ways. Paul says, starting in verse 13, until we all reach unity in the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of men and their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up into Him who is the head, that is Christ. From Him the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love, as each part does its work. And that's the thing, is knowing who you are and standing in that knowledge of who you are has just as much a part in this as the world kind of goes through its mess and chaos. And it even puts us in a place where compassion is a little easier to do, because you're not worried about how this is going to hurt you or how this is going to affect you. You don't think about, the extra work you're going to have to do. What you're thinking about is who you are. You're a follower of Jesus. You're a child made in God's image. You carry God's breath in your lungs. That's what matters. And you can trust your Father to take care of you at every turn, at every step. That none of your good deeds will be punished by Him. But instead, you'll always have His favor and His light shining on you. Live there. Remember these things and live there. And yeah, give up the rest of this stuff that might get in the way. There's a place for us to surrender and move into those states of intimacy where we can know Him and be close to Him, and from there be able to stand on the rest of it and even see through His eyes His own, His kids, our brothers and sisters, our family, and then be able to be a light to them as they're lost and caught up in the darkness. Because that's the thing, is this world's dark. There's all kinds of things that are happening all the time. Now is a great example of an extreme, but nothing's that different, really. People are kind of constantly being judgy or mean or critical or selfish. These things don't go away just because a pandemic passes or because it's not here yet. It's always there. But we're better than that. And that's a good place for us to be. Close to God and helping other people out of that darkness to see that there is a better way and that they're better than that. So, and also to not get so caught up on, our goals and achievements and the things that we're going to use as reasons for why we're not going to help people at this point in time, or, whatever. Sometimes I know I've had seasons where I've made the decision that I'm not going to help people because I needed to work on myself or something like that. And then God presents me with 2 or 3 people who need help. And I can't say no. Not because I can't physically say no, but because it feels too wrong to me to turn them away. So I help. And at the end, those kinds of people become lifelong friends and things like that. And even for myself, it was important for me to be able to snap out of that place of, self-involvement, and even be able to let compassion kind of move me in a way to remember who I am. So in all of this, remember who you are. Remember who you are, and remember who you can trust and how much God has done for each of us. Again, it's easy to lose sight for a minute, but he just will keep doing his thing, and he'll keep pushing on. And even though we get caught up in a moment, you know, it's like not to like diminish us in a way, but I always have my attention drawn back to children, and how like so often you make decisions for kids to protect them from themselves, or to protect them in the coming days or whatever. I had a lot of little siblings, but there's the kind of thing where it's like, you know, I remember when Dusty and I were kids, we used to go out to ponds and whatnot and look for frogs and things like that. We'd have all of our little brothers and sisters there too. And, you know, I'd tell some of them to stay up on the bank because, you know, if they got in, they might slip and fall in and they could drown. I could go up to deeper water than they could. But they didn't always understand that. And so they get hurt or offended or feel like they were being left out. They wanted to look for tadpoles too. And that felt unfair. But what they didn't understand was that I was trying to protect them in those moments. It wasn't trying to be exclusive, but they took it that way. And oftentimes our perceptions in those states can lead us to take things in a way that not even God certainly doesn't intend to do. And it puts us in a place of questioning his motivations and why he's doing what he's doing. Losing sight of it for a moment that he really does have our best interest in mind. And I know that with some circumstances that can be a lot harder to appreciate. You know, as we struggle with illness and things like that. It can be really hard to forget that God's on our side. And that he's pulling for us and fighting for us. But it doesn't change the fact that he is. So while that can be hard, it's also important to remember that. Remember who your Father is. During the spiritual warfare series, this is the last thing that I've got to share before we kind of like pray for a minute. During the spiritual warfare series, I kept reiterating the point about how Satan's biggest targets whenever demons attack us or, you know, try to work their machinations to mislead us and deceive us, the two biggest targets that they go after are God's character and our character. And the reason being is that we're talking about compassion now, and I didn't realize this was going to be a series until God kept giving messages about compassion. And the thing of it is that with compassion, this is one of the most world-shaking things in terms of us being Christians. And it's not because, you know, it's not loud and flashy. It's not like somebody having going up there with no tongue and then being somebody praying for healing and they grow their tongue back. That's very loud. Compassion and showing compassion is something that lasts, though. See, that tongue thing can happen in a moment and then people move on and they forget about it. But compassion and the showing of compassion and the atmosphere of that as we move and take care of each other in ways that maybe we don't even understand at times, it creates an atmosphere. It changes the world around us. And that perpetuates itself and moves, and that changes us in the process as we carry that atmosphere with us. And we bring it to the different places that we go and into the different circles that we become a part of, to the different friends that we meet and the family that we spend time with. And that permeates those times and existences, creates states of peace and care and love, and brings people to places where they can drop their guard because they know that they're dealing with somebody who wants to take care of them legitimately, not they're gonna control everything, but that they legitimately care and want the best. It changes the entire dynamic of your social circles and how they work. And that's the thing, is like, this is world shaking in the way that God is most apt to have it be. We follow a savior who was known for being meek and long suffering.
I was watching Dusty like
She's
barricade the
articulating.
Doritos from Grace.
Where's your compassion, Dusty?
It's like, time to apply this message. I am the application.
So, I mean, like, with all of that, like I said, the attack is always going to come into those places of who you are and who God is. Because if they can disrupt one of those things, if you start not believing in God, how are you going to trust enough to be able to show compassion in those hard times? You're just going to run up against, well, God's not taking care of me, I have to take care of myself. In the same way, who you are is disrupted, that's when we start getting into places of sin. You know, I don't matter. No one cares about me. Why should I do this? Who am I to even do this? I can't. I may as well, just cope with how I feel about the circumstances in my life. Or, yeah, I'm actually a terrible person. That's what everybody keeps telling me. I guess I'll just perpetuate that because that's who I am. We do that stuff. We think that way. And when it's presented in such a way, a lot of us can be like, I would never, until we get to those dark moments when it's a choice and, we start thinking, well, my whole walk with God's invalid anyways. I'm a bad Christian. I can't. I need to stop. I don't even know why I walk around saying that I am this. And we fall. Or we fall before that, and then we let those judgments permeate our existence. Don't do that. That's not you. That's just stuff from the enemy. That's Satan's little plans to break you down and get you to give up on this stuff. Because every single one of us is obscenely powerful in our approach and in how we interact with the world around us. Compassion is such a universal thing. And if you feel like you lack it, ask God for it. Ask for that heart. And even if you feel like you have plenty, ask for more. Because just in this one thing, we have the ability to really affect the world in a way that transcends what we're accustomed to. It goes against the grain of the world around us. It creates light in the darkness. And the enemy does not want that. He wants a status quo of chaos and people being tossed around by it. And we're blessed to be able to stand in opposition to everything that he's doing. And that makes you valuable. That makes you very important. Remember that. You were worth, God looked at you and decided you were worth dying for. It's a kind of a big statement, ultimately, that maybe we miss sometimes. But these are the things to stand on. Remember who you are. Remember who God is. Stand on those things. And those things will free you to be able to commit great acts of love and compassion that change the world around you. That's it.